Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto has Senju Namikaze and Uzumaki clan bloodline? Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. To say Namikaze Minato was having a bad day would be an understatement. His last month has been living hell for him. He was finally finished with the last pile of paperwork, the devil spawn that continued to haunt all cages. Today, the Yondaime was in another session with the council regarding his wife, who has been missing for the last month. This along with the pressures of being Hokage was bringing Minato to his knees. His wife, Kushina, was pregnant with his child and being a Jinchuriki, she was vulnerable to having her tenant, the Kyuubi no Yoko, released from the seal and wreak havoc upon the world. This could potentially kill his wife, but being an Uzumaki, she had quality life force and because of this she had a chance to live through Kyuubi being extracted, but all the same it worried Minato, nonetheless the fact that his wife and child were in danger. He barely controlled himself from tearing apart the village when they first went missing. That was the day they felt the wrath of the Yondaime. Minato sighed and ran his hands through his yellow blonde hair, which felt greasy and dirty. He looked down at himself, feeling pathetic at the fact that he couldn't do simple things like clean himself, or eat 3 full meals anymore, and even sleep through the night anymore. His Jonin outfit was worn out from being worn all the time. He was up constantly looking for his wife, on the manhunt with Anbu. The trail had led to somewhere in the village, making it an inside job. He gritted his teeth thinking about that fact. He knew as Hokage he had to protect the village, but it felt like he couldn't even trust the village. He only had 4 months. 4 months until his child would be born. Minato slammed his fist on the desk in front of him, splitting it in half through his sheer force. The Anbu in the room flickered into appearance in front of Minato, alarmed at the noise. He looked up and started sweating, then said with a fake smile, "Sorry there, just frustrated today." The Anbu looked at one another and nodded, then flickered out of view. Minato sighed and pushed the desk to the side. He got up and grabbed his Hokage robes, preparing to go to another meeting when the door to the office opened. Minato grabbed his robes and turned around to look at his predecessor walking into the room. Hiruzen Sarutobi looked at Minato with sympathy on his face. He was an elderly man, but still had more power than anyone in the village except Minato. He had shorter gray hair and a goatee, and the eyes of experience. He has on his old cage robes that covers him all the way down. He gently closing the door behind him. He walked forward and took a seat in one of the chairs. "What can I do for you, Hokage-sama?" Minato asked. "Please Minato, we are equals. You know to address me as an equal now," Hiruzen said. Minato sighed and looked at Hiruzen, who had a serious look on his face. Hiruzen took the pipe he had been smoking and said, "Minato, you need to rest. You have been working constantly." Minato slid his robes on and said, "There is too much to get done." Hiruzen took a look at Minato and said, "You haven't even showered or eaten well in the last few days, have you?" "Work's keeping me going." Minato snapped at Hiruzen. Hiruzen raised his eyebrows in question and Minato looked down, ashamed that he broke like that for that 1 second. "It's okay Minato. I can take over. You need to rest, take a day or 2 off," Hiruzen said, trying to reassure him. "I just want to be the first to hear when she is found. I've been dying to find her. And I'll be the first to tell you as soon as she is found, but you need to clean up." Minato finished arranging himself in a presentable manner and looked at Hiruzen when the door to the office slammed open. Minato and Hiruzen looked towards the door where there was a teenager with spiky gray hair and a face mask in an Anbu outfit out of breath. "Minato-sensei. Kakashi. What happened?" Minato asked. "We found her. Hokage Monument, top of the cliff," Kakashi said in between breaths. Minato's eyes widened and then instantly he was gone in a yellow flash. Hiruzen looked towards Kakashi and said, "Well done Kakashi. Go home and rest now. We will take care of everything. Hi, Hokage-sama, Kakashi said, and slowly walked out. Hiruzen stood up with authority and snapped his fingers. In front of him Anbu appeared around him. Follow Minato and assure that everything is under control. Hiruzen ordered. Hi, Hokage-sama. The four Anbu around Hiruzen said in unison and flickered away. The Kami no Shinobi was going to make sure that nothing else happened to Minato and his family while he was around. He promised it on his life. Minato flashed into appearance at the top of the cliff where laying there was Kushina, unconscious and breathing heavy. She was surrounded by different Anbu. Kushina. Minato shouted and darted over. He knelt beside her and lifted her in his arms. The Anbu all knelt and were at attention. Your orders, Hokage-sama. An Anbu behind Minato. I will be issuing orders for our Hokage, said Hiruzen behind the group. The Anbu stood and turned, looking at their previous Hokage and shouted in unison, Hokage-sama. You are to investigate this and look for any leads as to who might have committed the crime of taking Kushina captive, and follow up on any leads. I expect hourly reports, the Sandaime Hokage commanded. Hi, Hokage-sama. The Anbu shouted and dispersed. Minato was still kneeling next to his wife, cradling her now in his arms. He had a look of relief on his face, a trail of tears going down his face. Hiruzen knelt down next to Minato and said, let's get her to the hospital. Minato nodded and stood with his wife in his arms and they both disappeared in a flash. It has been hours now since Kushina was admitted. Minato was waiting outside the room, standing almost a guard, but impatient nonetheless. The doctors were working relentlessly to find out if anything had been done, and the longer they worked, the longer Minato went without any word of what had happened to her and his unborn child. He was getting antsy. Hiruzen walked through the hallway and took a seat in the waiting room, only a few feet away. Hiruzen looked up at Minato who had a determined but worried look on his face. Hiruzen shook his head and said to Minato, why don't you sit down here? She isn't going anywhere with all the guards we have posted around this place. Minato shook his head and stood at the door still, as if frozen in place. Hiruzen sighed and pulled out a pile of paperwork from his robes and continued the hell spawn that all cages had to deal with. It was only a few minutes later when the doors to the cage medical room opened and out came the head medical ninja, Nono Yakushi. She had a white cloth hood over her blonde hair and thick bold glasses. She had on medical robes over a black dress. Minato turned towards her and looked at her and Hiruzen stood immediately. He looked into her green eyes and asked desperately, how is my wife? My child. She looked at them both before saying, perhaps you should both come inside and see. Minato and Hiruzen looked at each other, exchanging looks. Minato turned back towards her and nodded. They walked inside the room and there stood the doctors slowly moving around the room, some sitting, tired. Off to the side stood the Anbu commander, observing the operation. Could I ask for everyone to leave please? Yakushi asked. The doctors all looked towards each other and then walked out the door. The Anbu commander remained frozen in place, at the corner of the room. Yakushi walked over to Kushina, who was sleeping soundly in the hospital bed. Minato walked over and started stroking her hair. How is she? Minato asked. Yakushi sighed and said, she is as healthy as she can be in a coma. A coma? Minato asked shocked. Yakushi nodded, then said, she is lucky to be alive at this point. We did a full body scan on her and she is as healthy as she can be considering her situation. Let me explain. Before you go on Yakushi-san, perhaps you should inform them about the child, the Anbu commander said. Ahem, yes, you're correct, but seeing how they are related, it's best to just dive in, Yakushi said. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow at this and asked, what exactly happened? You see, Kushina was kidnapped not for her, but for the child. We found after scanning over the baby that he wa. Did you say he? Minato asked. Yes Hokage-sama. Your child is a baby boy, Yakushi said. Minato smiled at this thought and nodded for her to continue. She cleared her throat and said, after scanning over the boy, we found that he was altered. What do you mean altered? Asked Hiruzen. To be specific, genetically altered, Yakushi said sadly. What? Hiruzen and Minato shouted. Yakushi nodded, looking at the two, letting them calm. Minato was fuming, stepping away from his wife to pace the room. Hiruzen was looking sadly at Minato and Kushina, wondering what kind of man would have done this and what this did to her and their unborn son. We can't tell you whose genetics they are, unfortunately. Considering the stress it's putting on your wife's pregnancy, it has to be some heavy genetics. You said she was healthy, Minato said. She is, but the stress on her body is the reason why she was put into the coma. We expect her to wake in 2 weeks. Minato nodded at this, then turned back to his wife, stroking her hair tenderly. Hiruzen looked at the scene in front of him and sighed internally. He knew this was going to be a long few months now that she was back, and what's more, now they have to worry about the child. 4 months later, Jiraiya, Minato, Kushina and Hiruzen were inside the Hokage office. There were seals glowing around the room, alerting the people in the room to the fact that they weren't going to be disturbed. Minato was sitting behind his desk, Kushina seated next to him. Jiraiya was standing in a corner across the room and Hiruzen was seated across from Minato and Kushina. The last few months had taken its toll on Minato and Kushina. Kushina was suffering from the pregnancy being disturbed, the stress was evident on her. Minato was working constantly as well and had a tired look on his face. He had been working with Anbu and Jiraiya to find the people responsible for Kushina's kidnapping as well as his regular Hokage activities and being a father-in-waiting. Jiraiya stood looking at the people in the room. He sighed knowing that his apprentice was suffering. He was worried for his surrogate family. He had worked with his spy network to figure out anything about Kushina's kidnapping. Meanwhile, he worked inside the village now and acted as a bodyguard and caretaker for Kushina. He really thought of her as a daughter now from these last few months. Minato and Kushina even asked him to be the godfather of their kid. He was of course happy to accept. Hiruzen cleared his throat and acknowledged everyone in the room. As we know, Kushina will deliver the child at the safety of the Hokage safehouse. Only we and the caretakers Bawako and Taji in charge of delivering Naruto know what is happening. Once he is delivered, Jiraiya will take him back to Konoha and Minato will reseal the Kyuubi. Once Kushina is resealed, she will be delivered back by Minato and will be put into high security. Does everyone understand? Hi, everyone said at once. Good, the task begins tonight. Minato, have you prepared yourself for any case? Hi, Minato said. Good, I will see you all when this is over then. Good luck. Minato arrived at the Hokage safe house and saw Kushina already in labor. Jiraiya was standing to the side against the wall with his head down while Bawako and Taji were working. Minato dashed over to her side and saw her in pain, but not screaming. Come on Kushina-sama, push, you're almost there. Bawako shouted. What's wrong? Minato asked. She's dying, Jiraiya said somberly. It felt like time stopped in the room for Minato then. He only saw his wife's face, scrunched up in pain. What? There's the head. Jiraiya-sama, come here, Taji said. Jiraiya got off the wall and walked over, ready to help. Minato stepped away from his wife and watched the scene unfolding before him. He saw Jiraiya standing, ready to hold his godson. He then saw Naruto, his son born before his eyes, crying. Kushina was breathing slowly now, more heavily. Bawako and Taji were working diligently now, working on Naruto and Kushina fast. Then Minato saw the Kyuubi seal weakening. He gritted his teeth and stepped forward, preparing himself to reseal Kyuubi into his wife when suddenly he was kicked away. Screams ran through the room then, as Bawako and Taji fell to the ground with kunai protruding from their necks. There was a man now standing in their place, a mask on his face and a black cloak over his body. He held Naruto in his arm with a kunai ready to kill him. Naruto! Minato shouted. Yondaime Hokage, step away from the Jinchuriki, or your child dies. The masked man said. Minato! Jiraiya shouted. Just calm down. We can work this out. Minato said. Do you care about your child? The masked man asked. I do. Minato said. Choose now, Yondaime Hokage. The man shouted. Then he tossed Naruto up into the air and held his kunai underneath him, ready to kill him. Minato dashed across the room in a yellow flash and caught him. The man then disappeared with speed and went to grab Kushina, but was intercepted by Jiraiya, with a Rasengan, spiraling sphere, in hand. Rasengan, he said, running at the masked man. The man walked then straight through Jiraiya and his attack, as if phasing through him. What? Jiraiya asked, bewildered, before plowing straight through the wall leading outside. The masked man grabbed Kushina and disappeared, but not before going through a half-tiger hand sign when sizzling was heard straight from Naruto's towel. Shit! Minato exclaimed before tearing off the towel and used the Hiraishin to teleport outside the house when an explosion went off. Minato saw Jiraiya kneeling in the grass, silently cursing to himself. Jiraiya-sensei! Minato shouted and dashed over to him. I'm fine. Just cursing our luck. Kushina was taken just before her death and the QB isn't resealed. We have to assume the worst. Get back to the village and inform Hokage Dono of everything that has transpired. Take Naruto, Minato said. Where are you going? Jiraiya asked. Hopefully to put a stop to this before it even starts, Minato said, determined. Right. Jiraiya said, taking Naruto. Jiraiya turned to leave, but Minato put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him for a moment. There was silence, then Minato said, if all else fails, promise me you won't stop me from what I have to do as Hokage. Jiraiya froze, now afraid for Minato. He grew to like him just from him being an apprentice, but now working with him constantly over the last few months only strengthened that. Jiraiya looked at him, then at Minato and said, I won't get in your way, and I will be the godfather that Naruto needs. Minato nodded and disappeared once more in a yellow flash. Jiraiya sighed and put Naruto down next to him. He went and bit his thumb, putting blood on the palm of his hand before going through hand signs. Kuchio's no jutsu. Summoning jutsu. There was a large cloud of smoke where Jiraiya stood on top of a giant toad with Naruto in his arms again. The toad had a tanto on his side and was smoking a pipe. He also had a jacket on him. Jiraiya, why did you summon me here? No time, Gamabunta. The QB is about to become unsealed and we need to warn Konoha. Let's go, Bunta said with a hop, taking off a long distance, reaching Konoha within minutes. Minato appeared in a room, and grabbed a coat hanging in the closet, his trademark Yondaime Hokage robes. He grabbed a full set of tri-prong kunai and geared up. He stood there, patting himself down, checking and making sure he had everything. He then said, I'm coming. And he disappeared in a yellow flash. Kakashi and Guy were walking through the streets. The masked kid with the silver hair and Anbu outfit everyone knew as Kakashi had been assigned with watching Kushina in the shadows for months, and this was a well-deserved day off. But not before being disturbed by the disturbing boy with the bowl-cut haircut and the green jumpsuit. Kakashi, I insist we have a youthful challenge. Rock, paper, scissors perhaps. No, not youthful enough. Perhaps a lap around Konoha. Guy, doesn't something seem off to you? Kakashi asked, sensing something afoul. You are trying to avoid the challenge. I must reclaim my place as top rival. Guy shouted. I'm sorry, Guy, did you say something? Kakashi asked too innocently. Curse you, Kakashi, and your cool hip attitude. Guy yelled to the sky. Hiruzen was working at the Hokage office on the small pile of paperwork. He seriously didn't know how Minato got through paperwork at the speed he did. He cursed himself for not thinking like Minato and continued working. He stamped a denial for a shinobi team to be sent to handle a domestic affair, sighing inwardly. All of a sudden, There was a large shockwave that felt like an earthquake and Hiruzen fell over in his chair. Anbu. What was that? A large toad has appeared outside the Hokage tower, sir. An Anbu said, flickering into view. Toad. What is happening? I will explain everything now, sensei. Jiraiya said, jumping in through the window. He turned and looked at the Anbu and said, place the village on emergency orders. Evacuate the civilians. Hi. The Anbu shouted. Hiruzen stood and looked at Jiraiya, who was holding Naruto in his arms. Prepare yourself. The kyuubi is about to be unsealed if Minato fails. Kushina was rooted in place, suspended in midair because of the fuinjutsu that is almost completely unsealed now. Kushina was, however, very near death, and if the seal released, then she would definitely die. She was suspended above a lake, the fuinjutsu chained to the surrounding rocks, and in front of her stood the masked man. How does it feel, Uzumaki Kushina? He asked mockingly. All she could do, though, was breathe to keep herself alive and to restrain the kyuubi, but her hold was close to losing completely now. Now is the time then, the man said before making a hand sign. He channeled chakra through himself and now the contract seal on the fuinjutsu and said, Kai. Release. Then, the fuinjutsu acted up, automatically pouring out evil chakra, red and vile in nature before it formed into a shape of a fox, more specifically, a nine-tailed fox. The fox unleashed a great roar before looking down at the scene in front of it. The kyuubi no Yoko had been unleashed into the world once again. Nice. Bad. The kyuubi is unleashed into the world once more, people. The masked man is here. What does he have to say? What's going to be different? Jiraiya is here. Of course. More fun and more intensity. Kushina tilted her head up slightly, looking at the kyuubi. The masked man stood in front of the kyuubi. He finally released the seal he was holding, justified with the formation of the kyuubi. He looked at the kyuubi and with one glance, the kyuubi calmed. It seemed almost under control now. Kyuubi control, complete, the masked man said. You'll never get away with it, Kushina heavily said. The masked man took a look at her and said, what is going to stop the kyuubi? Konoha. I intend to destroy it. Now. Not while I'm alive, Minato shouted, then appeared in front of Kushina. Namikaze Minato, still living up to his name of Konoha's yellow flash. I'm impressed that you managed to find me this fast, the masked man said comically. As long as I'm here, Konoha will not fall, Minato said. The kyuubi is mine now, you cannot stop me, the man said before kyuubi roared at Minato. The kyuubi's tails extended and whipped out to attack Minato, but too late since Minato already flashed away, Kushina in his arms standing a distance away. Impressive still, Yondaime Hokage, the masked man said before pulling kyuubi into some sort of space-time ninjutsu and disappearing himself along with it. Minato looked at this and frowned slightly, seeing how the spiral seemed to originate from his mask. He took a good look at Kushina and noticed how her breathing was very minimal at this point. Am I not too? She said between breaths. Shush now, it's going to be okay, Minato said. No, it isn't. I was dead as soon as I gave birth to Naruto. Promise me you will take care of him, Minato, she pleaded, losing herself now. I promise, he said, choking on his words. She slightly nodded before closing her eyes and giving a slight smile. She then went to sleep, her breathing fading completely. Minato looked down, seeing his wife dead in his arms when he saw tears slide off of his face onto her. He was crying now. Why? He asked himself. He wiped his tears quickly, then took his wife close in his arms and flashed out of existence, towards Konoha where the threat would be, mourning silently. It was quiet in the industrial part of the village. The buildings were mostly closed since it was nighttime and no work was done around these hours. The masked man landed softly on the ground and kneeled, taking in his surroundings. The buildings around him were dark, and closed off. He then went through hand signs swiftly before he shouted, Kuchio's no jutsu. Summoning jutsu. There was a huge cloud of smoke when suddenly the Kyuubi puffed into existence, and gave a tremendous roar, alerting Konoha to the return of the Kyuubi no Yoko. Hiruzen, Jiraiya and dozens of Anbu stood on the roof of the Hokage Tower, looking around the village for any sign of the Kyuubi while villagers were subtly evacuated. If this intruder was smart, they would go to the industrial village which was close to the residential district and farther away from the Hokage Tower. Hiruzen knew this and because of this looked off towards this direction. Jiraiya stood next to him quietly now, no longer holding Naruto who was now sleeping soundly inside the Hokage Tower. Hiruzen suddenly felt a large burst of chakra, vile and malicious in nature appear. Then in the distance a large plume of smoke appeared and the Kyuubi emerged and roared at the village. Hiruzen tore off his Hokage robes and stood in his battle outfit. Anbu, we move out and defend Konoha. Hi! Shouted dozens of Anbu behind Hiruzen, before dashing off into the distance to hold off the Kyuubi until their Hokage could deal with the tailed beast. The Kyuubi was engaged by many ninja from Konoha, moving to distract the beast, preventing damage that would be done. Many shouts could be heard from ninja all around. Yo, Kyuubi, over here, shouted one throwing a bunch of shuriken at the beast. No Kyuubi, over here, shouted another throwing kunai with explosive tags. Of course, none of this did anything except pester the beast, making it more enraged. The Kyuubi roared and flicked its tails around to get rid of the annoying flies. The masked man was nowhere to be seen now. Jiraiya, Hajime, came a distant shout that commanded authority. Hi, Kuchiyos, Yutai Kuzushi no Jutsu. Summoning. Food cart destroyer technique. Out of nowhere, a giant toad appeared above the Kyuubi and landed on top of him, causing a shockwave to spread through the village. The toad took out his tanto and stabbed it into one of the tails. And stay down, you mutt. The toad shouted. Nice job, Bunta. Sensei. Knock some sense into this thing. Jiraiya shouted on top of the toad boss. Hi, Kuchiyos. Monkey King Enma. Summoning of Monkey King Enma technique. There was a puff that appeared on a rooftop a small distance from Kyuubi and there stood Hiruzen in full combat armor and a monkey that stood taller than Hiruzen. The monkey looked around before noticing the fox, and said, so the Kyuubi has been unleashed now, Hiruzen. Minato didn't do a very good job, he said. There were some things that were unpreventable, Hiruzen said. I can see this. Henge. Kongonyoi. Transformation. Adamantine staff. Enma then turned from his monkey form into a large staff that Hiruzen then gripped and allowed to extend into the Kyuubi, smacking him in the head. The Kyuubi became enraged and flicked his tail, the tanto flying to the wall of the village and impaling itself in the wall. Gamabunta was getting loose, so he bounced off of the beast and landed outside of the village and steadied himself. Hiruzen knew this was an opportunity, so he extended the staff again, pushing Kyuubi through the wall and outside the village. He smiled at this small victory, and jumped after the giant fox. Minato appeared in the Hokage office, where Naruto was sleeping soundly. He sighed and put Kushina down on the floor of the room, directly in the center. He moved to Naruto and said, I won't let anything happen to you if I can so help it. Minato then disappeared outside and reappeared on top of the Hokage monument. More specifically, he was standing on top of his own head. He looked at the fierce battle going on in the distance and noticed the Kyuubi getting more agitated, and it finally began to charge a Bijudama, tailed beast bomb. Minato cursed to himself silently and started to swiftly go through hand signs. Then the Kyuubi turned straight towards Minato and launched it straight at him. Minato finished the hand signs and brought out his signature tri-pronged kunai and held it out in front of him and began the space-time ninjutsu. Out came what looked like a fuinjutsu seal but had a gaping hole in the middle of it, and in went the Bijudama. The giant purple chakra ball disappeared inside, and seconds later, a huge explosion could be heard a long distance away from the village. He smirked to himself at his quick thinking, but then felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned swiftly to find himself staring at the masked man attempting to pull him into his eye when he noticed it now. Sharingan. In the one eye hole of the mask. Minato swiftly used the Hiruzen, flying thunder god technique, and escaped. The masked man stood there for a moment, looking on at the Kyuubi and said to himself, the Hiruzen, what an impressive jutsu. Then the masked man disappeared in a swirl into space itself while saying, next time I'll be faster. As soon as I grab him. Sarutobi looked as the Bijudama launched itself towards the village and panicked slightly, when he saw Minato on top of the Hokage mountain. He smiled and saw him use a space-time ninjutsu to make the Bijudama disappear. He then turned serious again at the looming threat of the Kyuubi. He gripped Enma, who was still in staff form, in his hands and charged at Kyuubi. Jiraiya was standing on top of Bunta when the Bijudama went off and had to smile at his apprentice at how he handled the situation. Minato wasn't an SS-class ninja for nothing. Minato looked at Kyuubi, who was attempting to attack a group of ninja. He figured the best thing to do was to trap it now that it was outside Konoha. Bunta, I am going to trap him. Prepare to give him a beating. Jiraiya shouted. You got it. Gamabunta shouted. Jiraiya jumped down from Gamabunta and flew through hand signs before shouting, Doden, Yomi Numa. Earth release. Swamp of the underworld. Jiraiya saw the ground change underneath Kyuubi into a swampy mud muck, keeping the Kyuubi pinned. Now Bunta. Jiraiya shouted. Bunta leapt at Kyuubi and started to pound at him with his sword, only to be countered by his tails, while whipping the occasional water bullet at the fox. Hiruzen was smashing at Kyuubi with his staff, keeping the beast busy with the support of Konoha Nin. Minato reappeared near the Hokage mountain, not too far from the village. He panted a little though from the exertion he put into himself on the last few jutsu. When he caught his breath, he turned and was about to go to Konoha again when the masked man suddenly appeared before him. This time Yondaime, we fight on even ground, said the man. I wouldn't call having the Sharingan fighting even now, would I? Who are you? Minato asked. I am nobody, and I am somebody. Who I am is not important or relevant to this world anymore, but if you need a name, you may call me Madara Uchiha. Impossible. He is dead. Oh really? How do you explain me controlling the Kyuubi then? Only one such as myself could do it. No fool that follows Konoha could do it. Minato was boiling on the inside. He knew this man was probably flaunting him, but it all didn't make sense. He got past Anbu and himself with Jiraiya by his side, as well as being knowledgeable about Jinchuriki during childbirth. Being able to remove the seal and control Kyuubi is no small feat. He knew this man was probably who he claimed he was. What is your hope behind this attack? Konoha's destruction. This could definitely be called an attack on whim, or it be planned. I could do it saying it was for war, or for peace. Minato stepped back, clearly shocked. This man had some dangerous ideals. He looked at the man before him who was now shrugging as if warming up, then saw chains drop from the cloak of his. He looked ready to fight. Minato took a kunai from his pocket and prepared to engage him, when suddenly the man laughed. He actually laughed at him. What's so funny? You are clueless, Yondaime. The Kyuubi cannot be stopped, unless sealed once more. I intend to stop you first, and then the Kyuubi. I will not let Konoha fall. Even after they betrayed you. Betrayed the trust that you gave them. Minato's eyes widened at this. He observed the man carefully, looking for body language before asking, what are you talking about? I'm talking about your son Yondaime. I know all about him. Minato felt himself rumble and then he growled, you stay away from him and my wife. Your wife is dead, Yondaime. I know this. There is no way she could have survived giving birth to a child of such a magnitude, the man said simply. Explain. It's simple really. Your child has the genes of one of the greatest ninja ever produced. He was very much like you, a protector of the village. Minato let this roll over in his mind for a minute before his eyes widened and he said, you don't mean? Yes, he is going to gain power no one could dream of. He may even be better than his surrogate predecessor now. I look forward to fighting him in the future if he lives through the night. This ends now. I won't let you get the chance. Minato said before throwing his kunai at the masked man. The man simply gave a huff of air and let the kunai phase through him, but not before seeing the Yondaime charge in front of him, a blue spiraling ball in his hands. Rasengan. Spiraling sphere. Of course, this attack only phased through him too. Too slow Yondaime. The man said before pulled on his chains and whirling around to face him, only to find he had disappeared again. He sighed and turned to face the Hokage still within the clearing. He has the spiraling ball still in his hand, and was now holding two kunai. You cannot hope to defeat an Uchiha. We'll see about that, Minato muttered to himself, before throwing the first kunai, and charging to meet the man. Minato moved as fast as the kunai, behind it and planning his attack carefully. The man ran to meet him, and let the kunai phase through him. When it was done though, he stretched his hand and said, I win. Hiruzen, level 2. Minato shouted and disappeared, appearing behind the man snatching his kunai between his fingers and slamming the Rasengan in his hands into the man. Damn it! He flew to the kunai from earlier. Impressed? Minato asked, then took a breath and said, now you definitely will be. Minato deposited his kunai and went through hand signs quickly before the man could recover and slammed his hand onto the man's chest and shouted, Kyaku Fuin. Contract seal. The man cursed himself and felt his control on the Kyuubi released all at once. He no longer had a hold over the beast. Then he looked up at the man who ruined all of his plans with a fire burning in his eyes. Then he said, I must hand it to you Yondaime Hokage, being able to wound me and sever my ties with Kyuubi is not something to laugh at, but no matter. The Kyuubi will be my plaything again. I will take over the world, and there are so many ways to go about it. Then, the masked man used his teleportation jutsu and disappeared before Minato's eyes. He had thoughts going through his mind at rapid-fire pacing, but he knew the Kyuubi was still attacking the village. He took a breath and disappeared again using Hiruzen. He now knew what he had to do. Jiraiya was not having a fun time anymore. He was exhausted, firing off many jutsu and was about to call for support so he could go into sage mode. Gamabunta was doing no better, as he was fighting Kyuubi directly. Hiruzen was getting tired himself. He was getting desperate and needed the assistance of Konoha soon. He was standing off to the side when the Anbu commander flickered into appearance next to him. Hokage-sama, Konoha is ready to retaliate fully. Fire the flares. Hiruzen shouted. Hiruzen saw the flares go into the sky and then the ninja of Konoha went at the Kyuubi with full force, holding him off, but not before the Kyuubi started to charge another Bijudama. He can still do another. Hiruzen shouted. Jiraiya appeared next to Hiruzen and said, Sensei, without Minato we can't do anything. Kuchios. Yutai Kuzushi no Jutsu. Summoning. Food Cart Destroyer. Out of the sky dropped a giant green toad with swords in sheaths strapped to its back. On top of the toad stood Minato, looking down at the Kyuubi who was still charging its Bijudama. He cursed slightly and started to charge his chakra, preparing to Hiruzen himself and the fox. It's the Yondaime. The ninja cheered around him. Jiraiya smiled knowing his apprentice, and Hiruzen looked on, wondering what he would do. Then, they disappeared along with the fox. What the? Jiraiya shouted, before another explosion went off in the distance past the mountains. There. Hiruzen shouted. Gamabunta, go on home. You did well. I will summon Gamaken to assist me, Jiraiya said. Thanks Jiraiya. Summon me for a drink sometime though, the toad said. Jiraiya smiled and nodded, seeing Bunta disappear in a puff of smoke. Then he summoned Gamaken quickly and said, I need you to get me and Sensei over to Minato quickly. Time is of the essence. I will do my best, however I am quite ungraceful, the purple toad said. Jiraiya's sweat dropped at the toad, but shook it off quickly as he and Hiruzen jumped on the toad and took off into the distance. Minato was panting with Naruto in his arms. He was running very dangerously low on chakra. The Kyuubi had escaped from Gamadiro and was now preparing to attack Minato. He sighed and pulled out 2 scrolls. He laid one of them on the ground and formed the tiger seal. Fuin Kai. Seal release, Minato shouted. The scroll glowed, then suddenly an altar appeared and fuinjutsu marks ran across the ground until they reached the Kyuubi, who was entangled in them shortly, becoming encumbered. He roared at Minato, who smirked at him and began to do what he set out to do. He took the second scroll and scribed within it quickly, then rolled it up and set it to the side. Then he flew through hand signs and shouted, Shiki Fujin. Dead demon consuming seal. There was an ominous chakra then that surrounded Minato, and behind him appeared the Shinigami. Minato looked at his son, and shed tears. He never wanted this to happen to his child of all people, but he had to protect him, and protect Konoha. I am so sorry, he whispered. There was a loud crash behind Minato and there landed the toad carrying Hiruzen and Jiraiya. Kid. Jiraiya shouted. Stay back. This is my job, Minato said. Jiraiya and Hiruzen stood together on top of the toad and watched him. They both knew what was happening as soon as they showed up, but couldn't do anything. The scroll that Minato had put to hold the Kyuubi in place was also a barrier seal. Minato was running low on chakra now. He knew from the seals he had placed he was getting dangerously low. He thought about taking the Kyuubi with him together, but then crossed that thought because his son was the perfect person to hold him. If this masked man was correct, his son would be able to contain the Kyuubi with no problems. The question was, could he draw on the Shinigami enough to be able to form this seal to hold both the yin and the yang chakra of the Kyuubi? He mulled it over before finally deciding quickly. He flew through a set of hand signs and shouted, Kuchio's no jutsu. There was a puff and then an altar appeared in front of Minato. He went and placed his child on the altar quickly and looked at the Kyuubi. He gave him a defiant glare and the Kyuubi roared back at Minato. Minato flew through a final set of hand signs before shouting, Hake no Fuin Shiki. 8 trigrams sealing style. Minato felt the rest of his chakra leaving his body and the restraints on the Kyuubi weaken. He looked at the Kyuubi and realized it was starting to get free, so he hastened the sealing process. He shouted in pain as he felt his whole body burning from the effort, his soul about to be taken by the Shinigami. Jiraiya was now shaking where he stood. He couldn't stand the sight of Minato dying in front of him. He was probably his most treasured student he had ever had. Hiruzen was shedding a tear at the sight of Minato dying now. He couldn't stand to see someone who was younger than him die. He should have been the one to seal Naruto away, but knew this was his right as a father to do this. Minato was weakening in spirit now. He felt faint and was ready to give up, but with one look at his child, he realized Kushina would be up his if he gave up. He channeled more chakra into the sealing process now, determined to seal the Kyuubi into Naruto completely. Naruto, I suppose I should tell you everything now, huh? I know you are a strong kid, and you will surpass me one day. I want you to grow up healthy, be loved and have lots of friends and loved ones. I want you to find some people that are special to you. I want you to take care of yourself, eat healthy every day unlike your mother who has to eat ramen like it's going out of style. I want you to work hard, but have fun and be a kid above all else. I want you to be you. Minato was crying by the end of his speech. He wasn't going to see his kid grow up, like every parent wish they could, but it was his duty as his father to protect him and as Hokage to protect Konoha. Jiraiya and Hiruzen heard every word that the man had uttered and were shedding more tears now. Jiraiya mouthed to himself, Baka, but knew it wouldn't do any good. With one last effort, Minato gave a shout and the sealing process was completed. Minato fell over as soon as the process was over. He felt very weak, not feeling anything in his entire body. The seals everywhere around him dissolved except for the seal on Naruto. He smiled knowing he had completed the job he set out to do. Kid. Jiraiya shouted and landed next to him. Minato gave him a weak smile through the tears he had shed in pain. He tried to speak but couldn't find his voice. He winced and then tried again, clearing his throat. Scroll, he whispered. Jiraiya nodded in understanding, waving the scroll he grabbed that was rolled up on the ground in front of his face. Minato nodded slightly and looked towards the altar where his child was. Hiruzen was standing over Naruto now, looking over him, giving a side glance to Minato where he smiled sadly. I'm sorry, Minato whispered. Don't be sorry. No one could have predicted this. Take care of Naruto, Minato said, tears falling freely down his face. Of course, Jiraiya said, now shedding tears of his own. And with that, Minato closed his eyes and breathed his last breath. Jiraiya looked up at Hiruzen, who was now carrying Naruto in his arms. The child of the Yondaime was crying in his arms, as if he knew what was happening. 1 week later, Hiruzen was sitting in the Hokage office, holding Naruto, who was asleep, in his arms. He was still waiting for Jiraiya to return to the village, who had carried out the mission Minato left for him. It had been a busy week, not only for Jiraiya however, but for him as well. Hiruzen had been immediately reinstated as the Hokage, as a state of emergency had been declared within the village. With the Yondaime dead and with Naruto practically being questioned about everywhere, Konoha was a target for Iwagakure because of the Third Shinobi World War. Minato was Iwagakure's worst enemy at the moment, and were most likely rejoicing he was dead, but with Naruto still alive, it left him a target for assassins. Not only this, but the life of a Jinchuriki was a tough one. Anyone knew that Jinchuriki was a living hell. No one wanted to associate themselves with the person, but Hiruzen sighed as people couldn't tell the difference between a scroll and the kunai that was sealed within it. It was arrogance that led these people, he knew, but at the same time he counted them innocent. Minato knew this as well, especially after seeing how arrogant people could be when kidnapping his wife and had left instructions. He looked down at his desk where piles of paperwork were stacked orderly, and in the center lay a partially opened scroll containing Minato's last message addressed to him and Jiraiya. He got up and put Naruto in the crib that was in his office and went back to his chair, sitting back down. He looked at the scroll, knowing he had read it dozens of times, but couldn't resist reading it again, seeing how much he failed Minato, along with the fact that he was disturbed but resolved every time he read the scroll. He picked up the scroll and opened it for what seemed like the 100th time and read. Jiraiya, Hiruzen, I apologize, but I must keep it short. I don't have much time, as you probably saw. I will tell you what you need to know in my final requests. The attack was planned. Kyuubi was taken control of by the masked man, of which Jiraiya will be able to tell you about in physical appearance. I learned more, however. This man claimed to be Madara Uchiha. No one should know but you two until the time is right. This is to be an SS class secret. I don't know whether to take it for word or not, but he had Sharingan and had great power, although was injured easily. I could say he is imperfect, but to be able to take control of Kyuubi is a great feat. My son Naruto was hopefully given the Kyuubi for many reasons. You probably are wondering why I even give him the power that a Jinchuriki gets anyways. I will tell you now. I love Konoha deeply still. I regret that some of its people betrayed me, but I must protect it. It is the duty as Hokage. Along with this, the masked man left me with a warning that he is out to take over the world. I believe Naruto is the person who will be able to stop this man and save the world. Naruto will need as much power as he can get for the coming battles ahead. Also, Naruto is the perfect person to have the fox sealed within. He is an Uzumaki after all, and has a power. A seed has sprouted and will bring about a great change in Konoha. You will recognize it immediately, hopefully, and will take certain steps to guarantee he does. I will him all my belongings and knowledge in my library. Although it isn't much, do give it to him. Jiraiya, I want you to find your old teammate, and give her a request. Tell her to go to Konoha with you, then show her Naruto and ask her to raise him. Do whatever it takes. I have a feeling. Hiruzen, cover it up so Naruto will have died if you can, if he goes with Jiraiya's teammate. It will leave Konoha to be left alone from Iwa and will save Naruto grief in the future hopefully. He needs a family, and Tsunade may be able to give this to Naruto. Jiraiya, I pray you will take care of Naruto and protect him. He will need it soon if this man is who he claims to be. Take care of Naruto. Take care of Konoha. Take care of each other. I am with my wife soon. Minato. Yondaime Hokage. Somewhere distant in Hai no Kuni, the land of fire. Jiraiya was traveling faster than most Jonin could. He had been looking everywhere in Hai no Kuni and was about reaching the limit, and decided he needed to rest for what would be the second time in this trip. He knew Tanzaku town was nearby and decided to stop there since there was a nice inn there and he could do some research. He giggled at the thought of having a nice rest tonight, especially surrounded by some nice ladies. He took off towards the town quickly and reached it within an hour, exhausted for traveling 2 days straight again. He stepped into the town and decided to check quickly and see whether or not Tsunade was in town, since this was his mission anyways. Who knows, he might get lucky and find the legendary sucker. He walked past many of the bars and saw her nowhere, but knew he still had to check the gambling den. He walked towards that area when he heard a shout of frustration that sounded akin to an angry female bear. Yup, that's my Heim alright. Jiraiya thought to himself. Jiraiya sighed and knew that it was going to be a long night. He walked into the gambling den and saw Tsunade, head pinned against a slots machine, with a younger girl sitting next to her, sighing. Tsunade-sama, shouldn't we at least find an inn to take us in tonight? I suppose we should, Shizune. I've lost enough today as it is. Some drinks could help with this after all, Tsunade said, regaining a little of her spirit. Same old Heim huh? Jiraiya said, walking in on their conversation. Jiraiya, what are you doing here, you old pervert? She asked. Jiraiya-sama, it's a pleasure to see you again, the girl said next to Tsunade, who Jiraiya now recognized. Hey Shizune, growing up I see since I last saw you. Glad to see that, and as for what I am doing here, perhaps we should find somewhere to talk. It's a long story. This better be good. Tsunade, Jiraiya and Shizune soon found themselves in a tavern not too far away from the gambling den. Jiraiya was now on his second drink while Tsunade was sipping on her sake. Shizune quietly sat in the corner, watching the two drink. I suppose I should get started, Jiraiya said. Konoha wants me back, don't they? Tsunade asked. Jiraiya laughed loudly at this and then sniffled. He looked at her and took on a serious look. He breathed and said, Minato and Kushina are dead. Tsunade and Shizune both gasped visibly, which surprised Jiraiya not on Shizune's end but Tsunade, but not for long as she suddenly took on a visible smirk and said, I knew the job was cursed. No way a fool like Minato should have taken it. You didn't even ask how you baka. Jiraiya shouted. This got Tsunade to shut up. He would never call her baka, but seeing his angry face made her realize that he was serious about this. She took a sip of her sake again before gesturing Jiraiya to continue. Jiraiya, now having her full attention, looked at the two and said, I can only tell you part of the story, because the rest is a SS class secret and can only be heard back within Konoha. I do need you to come back with me, but not for the reason you think. Are you willing to listen? They both nodded at Jiraiya, who smiled at his small victory. He cleared his throat and took a final swig of his drink and said, here's what happened during the Kyuubi attack. To say that Hiruzen was angry was an understatement. He was furious. He just got finished with a council meeting and they demanded to know the condition of Kyuubi container. The civilian council wished for the child to be eradicated altogether, while Danzo, who Hiruzen knew was the leader of an underground group called Root, wished to take the child under his wing to be raised as a weapon. The Shinobi Council all offered to adopt the child formally, and raise him under their wings, but Hiruzen denied all of these requests, saying that the will of the Yondaime told him to do otherwise. Thank God he had that to fall back on. He was still assaulted by Danzo and the civilian council no less. Hiruzen looked at Naruto, who was sleeping in his crib now. He sighed at the sight of the child and looked outside at the moon falling behind the forests and mountains. He was now wondering what Jiraiya was doing and what was taking him so long. Please hurry, Jiraiya. I can't keep the child hidden much longer. Tsunade and Shizune were far from shocked from what they had heard from Jiraiya. They were appalled at what the child Naruto had already gone through in his short life in this world. Tsunade was nearly brought to tears at the thought of a child so innocent was given things like this, while Shizune was shedding tears silently. Why are you telling me these things? Tsunade asked. I think you know Haim. I want you to come back and meet Naruto, and then decide whether or not you will raise him, Jiraiya stated bluntly. Raise him? Tsunade asked shocked. Can't someone in Konoha do it? Shizune asked. Because he is the son of Minato and is the QB container, this makes him a target for any assassin or captor. He would be swept up by any hidden village as soon as the opportunity revealed itself. Tsunade nodded in understanding. Shizune wiped her tears up on her sleeve, and then looked at the two seated in the table. Jiraiya was sitting back against his bench with his arms crossed and his eyes closed in thought. Tsunade was taking a small drink and considering everything that she was told. Tsunade-sama, I think we should see Naruto. He needs a family, and honestly, I always wanted a little brother. Can we at least see him? Tsunade looked at Shizune and after a moment of thinking, she nodded. It didn't take her long to think about it. She wanted to see the child herself, and if what Jiraiya told her was true, she wanted to test something. She gave a smile to reinforce the nod and Shizune smiled a little herself. We'll go with you, ya pervert. Let's just get a good night's sleep first and then we will head out tomorrow. If we travel fast enough, we can make it by the end of the day tomorrow, Tsunade said. Jiraiya nodded, accepting the answer easily. He stood up and went to get himself a room. Once he grabbed one, he went back and said, Get a good sleep. We're traveling at high speed tomorrow. I already fell behind as it was. The next day, Jiraiya, Tsunade and Shizune were walking out of the town slowly, not arousing attention to themselves. Jiraiya chatting idly with them while looking around. He felt an eerie chill, like something bad was going to happen, but he didn't know what. Are you two ready to go? Jiraiya asked with finality. Yeah, let's get going, Tsunade said. Excited to see Konoha again, Haim? Jiraiya asked and burst out laughing. Hardly, Tsunade said. Hiruzen was sitting in his office, stamping paperwork swiftly, looking over the documents. A request to send shinobi out of the village for an escort of goods to a border town. The goods were all unnecessary. He sighed and stamped it with a denial and went to the next when the door to his office suddenly opened and in walked Danzo. Good day, Hiruzen. I hope I am not interrupting your work, the man said. Hardly, Danzo. Please come in, Hiruzen said. Danzo closed the door and sat in the chair in front of the desk where Hiruzen was seated at. Hiruzen gave the man a good look over. He seemed as he was every day. He was bandaged all over, and was surprised to say he still never showed any pain if there was a reason for it. He was wearing a kimono of a lighter blue shade and wore the cold stare he always had. I hope that you are well. Caring after Naruto and being Hokage is a tough load after all, Danzo said, smiling slightly. I am just fine, thank you, Danzo, Hiruzen said sternly. I hope that Naruto is doing fine as well. I haven't had the chance to see him at all, Danzo said. He's sleeping currently, Danzo. In the crib there. He is always under my watch or under Anbu watch, Hiruzen said, irritated, hoping to get Danzo to back down. Glad to hear that, Hiruzen. Danzo started. While I am Hokage Danzo, you will address me as Hokage or Hokage-sama, Hiruzen said, gritting his teeth. Why, even an old teammate cannot call you by your name? Danzo asked. You are crossing dangerous lines the past few days, Danzo. Spit out what you want because I have a village to run, Hiruzen snapped in reply. I was hoping you would reconsider my offer to raising Naruto, Danzo said. My decision is final. Denied, Hiruzen said. But you have no say over Naruto and the jurisdiction he lies in. He is shinobi. Not yet. Danzo stood abruptly and pointed at the child saying, he is an orphan and will gain much by being in my organization. By turning him into a mindless, emotionless ninja. What you teach them I allow because you do much for the village's sake, but I will not hand you the son of Minato-kun. You are making a huge mistake, Hokage-sama. I promise you that this is something you will regret. Not if what I have planned for happens occurs. This conversation is over. It never started. Danzo gave Hiruzen a glare and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him, abruptly waking Naruto. He cried from being waken up noisily. Hiruzen sighed and picked up Naruto, calming him. He grabbed a bottle from the desk and started feeding him. He wondered when Jiraiya would return with Tsunade. Tsunade, Jiraiya and Shizune finally reached Konoha. They were now walking slowly towards the village on the road, taking a breather from their long-distance traveling. They stopped on the edge of the forest and looked towards the village. Are you sure you want to do this? Jiraiya asked. I appreciate your concern, but I am positive. I have to do this, Tsunade said positively. No you don't. Minato wants you to. I want you to. But you don't have to do it. I want to do it, Tsunade said with conviction. Jiraiya smiled, knowing that she wanted to do this of her own free will, but if he was being honest with himself he would say he was nervous for her. She left Konoha because of what she thought the village had done to her. Her lover Dan and her little brother Nawaki died being affiliated with Konoha. They both had the dream of wanting to become Hokage, and because of that dream along with the necklace around her neck she was led to believe that Konoha and that necklace was cursed. Perhaps Naruto could help her get past those two and move on. Let's go in, shall we? Jiraiya said with a shit-eating grin. The two girls nodded and they walked out of the forest on the road towards Konoha. Standing watch at the gates were two newly instated Chunin, Azumo and Katetsu, who would be known later as the Eternal Chunin. Azumo looked out towards the road and saw the three walking towards Konoha now, but couldn't tell who they were. He kicked Katetsu, who was lounging in what sounded like snoring, and said, Hey, there are some people coming towards the village. Probably some travelers, Katetsu said, yawning. No, they don't look like it. Come on, get your lazy up. Katetsu stretched and stood up, looking out. He squinted and then held an expression of shock. You're right, those aren't travelers. That's Tsunade and Jiraiya of the Sannin. And it looks like Shizune is along with them, supposedly Tsunade's apprentice, Katetsu exclaimed. No shit. Well, it looks like we just let them pass, Azumo said. Katetsu nodded and yawned, taking a seat back in his chair. After a moment, Jiraiya, Tsunade and Shizune could be seen passing through the gates, giving a wave to the two Chunin. They gave a smile and waved back to the party. Jiraiya took them and led them through the streets, where civilians could be seen gawking at the sight of Tsunade and Jiraiya walking through the streets. Is that Tsunade? Has she returned? What about Jiraiya? What is he doing here? They never show up anymore. Many more whispers could be heard around Konoha as they passed through the village. They sighed at their antics and kept walking through Konoha. Hiruzen was sitting doing paperwork now. Naruto was fast asleep also. Hiruzen stamped another paper when suddenly an Anbu flickered into appearance, kneeling. Hokage-sama. Jiraiya-sama has returned with Tsunade-sama and Shizune, her apprentice, the Anbu said. Thank you, Bor. You are dismissed, Hiruzen said. The Anbu nodded and flickered away, disappearing completely. Hiruzen sighed and got up, grabbing Naruto. He went and walked out of the office to wait at the base of the tower for the company to arrive. Jiraiya, Tsunade and Shizune finally arrived underneath the Hokage tower. They were walking up when they noticed Hiruzen standing outside smiling, holding a bundle of blankets in his arms, and was donning the Hokage robes and hat. Tsunade had to smile at the sight a little bit, while Jiraiya gave him a shit-eating grin that told him, I told you so. Hiruzen only smiled at his old student's antics and walked up to them. I'm glad to see Jiraiya brought you back, Tsunade. Thank you for coming and welcome back to Konoha. We have much to discuss. Tsunade gave him a small smile and nodded. Shizune was smiling brightly nearby behind her sensei and was looking on the scene with a distinct eye. Tsunade then noticed the bundle Hiruzen was holding, maternally almost. Is that Naruto? She asked. Hiruzen smiled and held out the bundle in his arms to Tsunade. She gave a slightly bigger smile and took the bundle from Hiruzen, looking at the child in her arms now. She smiled at him and how he had the same blonde hair his father did, and the face that he had. She pulled the blanket away from the child a little and saw the sealing mark on his belly that marked him as a Jinchuriki. She knew this would go away in time. Almost anyone would know that. She tucked the child in the blanket again and looked at his face and gasped a little. She was shocked not because of Naruto waking up suddenly, smiling up at her slightly. She was shocked because of his eyes. His eyes were forest green. Hiruzen, Tsunade, Naruto, Shizune and Jiraiya were all in the Hokage office, with the silencing and privacy seals up. It was nighttime now, but they wanted to make sure that no one was going to be interrupting their meeting. Hiruzen was sitting behind his desk. Shizune was sitting in one of the chairs next to Tsunade, who was standing holding Naruto, smiling. Naruto was sleeping in Tsunade's arms and still had a slight smile on his face. Jiraiya was leaning against the wall next to his usual entrance, the window. If everything went as I thought it would, Jiraiya told you everything about the Kyuubi attack that he was permitted to tell you there, Hiruzen said. Yes. It's amazing that Minato gave his life for the village like that. It was sad to hear that Kushina had died too, Tsunade said. The Kyuubi is a formidable foe. Minato did not give his life for nothing. He succeeded in sealing the Kyuubi in Naruto, Hiruzen said. Right, but the Shikifuin takes a person's soul in exchange for someone else's life. What ended up happening is Minato sealed the Kyuubi completely into Naruto, at the cost of his soul, Jiraiya said. But the cost is always the soul. What's so different about this? Tsunade asked. Minato used the Shinigami as a channel in order to seal Kyuubi into Naruto. Because of this his soul was completely shattered, lost within the Shinigami's world, Jiraiya said softly. He looked down and sighed, knowing that what he did was very risky, but worthwhile. Hiruzen smiled sadly knowing that the Yondaime had succeeded where many before him had failed. He didn't know what to make of the situation at best, but he knew Tsunade being here was a sign at best. He cleared his throat and said, there is something that needs to be addressed before we can tell you what I believe should happen. Tsunade looked up at this, and nodded for him to continue. Shizune was also intrigued by this, as she was already having a little difficulty with some of the information. Hiruzen sighed and said, we believe there to be a mastermind behind the Kyuubi attack, no. We know there to be a mastermind. Tsunade and Shizune both gasped visibly at this. How could someone put together an attack on the scale of the Kyuubi attacking a hidden village? Shizune stood up at this and said, impossible, no one has been able to control the Kyuubi except for Uchiha Madara. Exactly Sensei's point Shizune. Madara Uchiha was the one who organized the attack, Jiraiya said. Tsunade gaped at Jiraiya and stuttered with her words for a minute, before shouting, Uchiha Madara was killed by my grandfather. No way in the name of all shinobi is Madara alive today. I saw him myself He evaded both me and Minato for a while, but Minato got a good blow on him before he escaped. Uchiha Madara is alive and well, and we must be prepared, Jiraiya stated boldly. Prepared for what? Shizune asked. For anything. He knew about Naruto and what happened to him during his time in the womb. He has taken an interest into Naruto and will most certainly be targeted by him now that the Kyuubi is sealed within him, which means we must prepare for him to be trained when he is ready. I want him to be taken outside the village to be raised, Hiruzen said. Tsunade let this roll over in her head for a moment. She knew that Naruto leaving the village would raise many problems. For one thing, he was the son of a Hokage, which meant he should be under protection of the village. This could be easily solved by faking his death, but even then there would be some people that knew he was still alive, which left room for leaks. Another thing is the level of protection for Naruto. Sure, a Sannin and probably a Jonin could handle it, but even two people on that level may have no hope of taking on someone such as Madara. She thought that with her and Shizun's way of traveling they could go into hiding relatively easily, making money on the road. They would have to drop a few bad habits, but it would be doable. I find this acceptable, but what about adequate protection for Naruto? As going into hiding may not be enough, Tsunade said. You're right. While you and Shizun alone are very good shinobi, you cannot take on all threats. Which is why Jiraiya will be with you from time to time along with his assignments for his spy network, Hiruzen said. Plus it allows me to fulfill my arrangement as his godfather. Jiraiya said, grinning a little now. Tsunade nodded, but was still unsure of whether to take this arrangement. She looked down at the child she was holding, still asleep. When she came here she had serious doubts, but already were they dissolving in her arms. Naruto was something she knew would be wrong to turn down. She already wanted to take him and run with Shizun away from Konoha. She knew one day that Naruto would return to Konoha because it was his birthright too. She had much time on the road to get rid of her hatred for Konoha, but she still held some spite for it inside her. Naruto might be her redemption. And the eyes she saw. She only saw those eyes in one other person, and that was her grandfather, Senju Hashirama. She knew what she had to do now. She knew what she wanted to do. I will accept my place as Naruto's mother and protector, Tsunade said declarative. Everyone smiled at her and she gave a big grin back, pulling Naruto closer to her chest. Hiruzen pulled out some papers and started writing away swiftly. Jiraiya got off the wall and walked up to her. She looked at him, narrowing her brows and said, I swear to God you pervert, don't make this awkward. Jiraiya only walked up and put his arms around her and said, I'm proud of you, Haim. Thank you. Tsunade stiffened at first, but then she relaxed and nodded. Shizun stood up and said, I'm also proud, Tsunade-sama, and thankful. I always wished to be a big sister. Now I get that opportunity. Of course. It's only right that you do. Jiraiya said, laughing. Hiruzen finished signing papers and stood up. He looked at the small surrogate family in front of him and had to smile at the sight. Everything is ready for you to leave. I will take care of the rest. Jiraiya has already prepared a place in Cha no Kuni, the land of tea. I leave you with a final warning, however. Watch for both allies and enemies. Trust no one. Good luck, you four, Hiruzen said. Tsunade, Shizun and Jiraiya all gave a nod towards Hiruzen. Hiruzen looked towards them and knew they were ready to leave. He smiled and motioned for them to make their way out quietly. No one ever saw Tsunade, Shizun and Jiraiya make their way out of the village that night, Naruto in their arms. It was then known that Naruto was assassinated by a foreign ninja. No one ever found out who it was, or how it even happened. Hiruzen was devastated for a while, but soon returned to work. The little family that disappeared soon found themselves at the border of Cha no Kuni. 2 weeks later, Tsunade and Shizun were sitting at the table, Naruto in Tsunade's lap. They were currently eating dinner. It had been 2 months since they made it to the border of Cha no Kuni, land of tea. It took them a week to get to Cha no Kuni so that way they could throw anyone off their tracks who might be after Naruto or the group themselves. When they made it through, Jiraiya brought them to a little town near the mid-eastern part of the country, closer to the coast. It was close to a few larger towns and was a good location to practice medicine from all the fishing accidents that happened. That was how Shizun and Tsunade were making their living nowadays. To get anyone that might be tracking down Tsunade and Shizun off their tracks, most likely for gambling debts, Jiraiya made it a point to pay off all of her gambling debts, which had left him grieving a little on the inside, but knew that protecting his godson was more important than his money. He had plenty of it anyways from his Ika Ika series. Jiraiya always had enemies, so he decided it was best if he visited, and didn't stick around for too long. He tried to make it a point to visit at least every weekend, however. This seemed to work out well since he had his spy network to lead anyways. Tsunade and Shizune soon settled into their new place and found it to be quite a homely place. Shizune and Tsunade gave it the touch that they thought it needed, and soon it came to be a nice family home. It was secluded also, away from the village that they were living at, but not too far either. They each had their own room, along 2 large bathrooms, a very nice and expansive sitting room, and a small but tidy kitchen. It had a nice yard in the back with some gardens that Shizune took to tending to when she wasn't busy with Naruto, studying or working. Tsunade had grown along with Shizune over the last 2 months, changing them drastically and in different ways. Tsunade turned from her old gambling and drunken persona to a changed motherly and spirited woman and kunoichi. She no longer took to gambling or drinking as often, instead doing it as a hobby every so often, and instead spent her time at home with Naruto, or working for the family. She didn't go around boasting her name either, instead taking on a fake persona everyone now in the area knew as Rina. Shizune also changed her name just to be safe, calling herself Sayuri. Tsunade and Shizune did this just to be sure that no one would go after them if they were heard about from farther away. Tsunade had taken time to develop her medical techniques over the past few months now, serious about getting into her work. One of the things she had developed that Shizune called genius was her wet nursing technique that allowed her to be more capable of feeding children even though she wasn't Naruto's birth mother. If this got back to the shinobi world, this would help thousands of people. Shizune had grown also, not only as a person in mentality, but physically also. She had hit another growth spurt and had developed more as a woman. Tsunade had to chuckle at some men's antics in the villages sometimes as they tried to ask her on dates or pull something on her. Sometimes she would leave them in a little more pain than necessary, but she would just smile hugely at this achievement. Shizune was proud of her master also, seeing her develop to become the mother she was now. She liked to help a lot, however, giving Tsunade breaks when necessary and working for the 3 of them. She was proud to call herself a big sister of Naruto already. Tonight, Shizune had made them a quite appeasing fish fillet with some herbs and vegetables from the market. Soon, Shizune would be able to make them from the garden. She had to smile at that thought a little. Naruto was being while the 2 of them ate. How were our allowances this month, Shizune? Tsunade asked. We're getting by. We don't overspend, which is nice. We even have a little leftover money from this month from the overtime. We're playing it safe, Shizune said. Let's keep it that way, Tsunade said, having a sip of water from her glass. Tsunade-sama, are you worried about Jiraiya? He hasn't been around for the last 2 weeks. He usually makes it a point to visit during the weekend. It's Saturday. That old pervert can take care of himself. If anything, he'll show up saying he was chasing a lead about our old teammate, Tsunade said, laughing a little. Very close actually, Haim. I was chasing a lead on our mystery masked man and on Kushina's captor, said Jiraiya from the doorway to the house. Jiraiya-sama, Shizune said, then rose to welcome him into the house. I'm fine, sit and eat, Shizune, Jiraiya said, laughing a little. He walked in quickly and sat at the table. Tsunade rose with Naruto in her arms, still feeding him, and said, thanks for the warning that you were here, you pervert. I'll be taking Naruto to the bedroom to feed him. Next time, be sure to warn me, or else. Jiraiya caught the dark note in Tsunade's statement and nodded quickly, when Tsunade gave him a slight smirk and walked off into the bedroom. Shizune was eating when she saw Jiraiya stand and grab something small from the fridge to eat. He sat down at the end of the table, and when she looked again, she gasped a little, shocked at the new mark on his neck. There was a brand new scar which ran from the front of his Adam's apple to the very back of his jawline, running along his neck. Oh, this. Don't worry about it. I had a run-in and they got too close to me. It's my own fault really, Jiraiya said, shrugging it off. You're usually careful though, Shizune said, obviously worried. What happened? I'll explain to you and Tsunade later, he said with a look on his face. Shizune nodded, appeased for now. Tsunade wouldn't look worried, but really she might be on the inside. Shizune was at the moment. Anyone who could get a mark on that like Jiraiya was obviously skilled enough to get in close and do that damage to him. Jiraiya sat comfortably eating some leftover miso, while waiting for Tsunade to come back into the room. Shizune was eating slowly now, watching Jiraiya. Tsunade returned after a few moments of silence and sat down at the table, resuming her meal. She didn't once glance over at Jiraiya, who was sitting eating his soup slowly still. After about a moment, Jiraiya started laughing and said, "What Haim, no glance over at me. You angry or something? I have to say though, from what I saw, I might have to try to peek in and catch a glance of those heavenly things that you wear we all call." "Not at all, Jiraiya. Just be happy I don't make you any less of a man for intruding on our mealtime while I was feeding Naruto without informing me you were here," Tsunade said with an evil gleam in her eyes. "Tsunade-sama, I believe Jiraiya-sama has something to say to the both of us," Shizune said. And for the first time that night, Tsunade looked up at Jiraiya and noticed the long scar running along his neck. She gave a visible raise of her eyes and even opened her mouth, a little shocked. She didn't really know what to say at that other than, "What the hell happened to you?" Jiraiya laughed at that and then he sobered up and put a serious look on his face. He looked at the two of them and said, "This story does not make it back to Sensei, do I make myself clear?" "What's with the secrecy?" Tsunade asked. "You'll see why, but promise me first," Jiraiya said. The both of them looked at each other and then nodded at Jiraiya. Jiraiya sighed and started stroking his chin, muttering something about where to begin. He looked up and said, "Naruto is something none of us could have predicted." "What do you mean?" Tsunade asked. "He's your relative Tsunade. He's a Senju," Jiraiya said. Tsunade gasped and Shizune's eyes widened at this. Tsunade looked at Jiraiya, who wore a dead serious look on his face, daring them to tell him he was wrong. When Tsunade and Shizune looked like they were calmed down, Jiraiya sat up straight and said, "About a week and a half ago, I met a contact of mine who gave me information that someone knew more about Konoha than they were letting on. He gave me a location about a secret base in the Land of Fire and told me that this was the best place to look at." "A secret base? Is this one of Orochimaru's old labs?" Tsunade asked. Jiraiya shook his head no and said, "I went there and discovered a clan of people. It turns out they could turn into mist. They are called the Ibari clan. It seems they are followers of Orochimaru and decided to attack me. I managed to capture a man and interrogated him successfully. He gave me the location of a secret base of Orochimaru. I made sure the clan was destroyed after. I don't want Orochimaru getting his hands on that clan if I can help it. Afterwards, I went to the base immediately and found it surprisingly near Konoha. Almost too close for comfort. I went in and found some of his research. It seems that this was an old base for experimenting on children, and some other things. After looking through some logs, I found out about how he and members of Root kidnapped a woman and gave her an injection, experimental. He said he needed a child of strong ninja in order to perform the injection to increase the odds of survival. He knew his injection had succeeded, but the searches were still going on. He knew he had to leave the woman and hoped to take the child later. "Get to the point, Jiraiya," Tsunade said. "Haim, I already did. If you were listening you would know the same thing as I did," Jiraiya said. Tsunade thought over everything Jiraiya said and then shouted, "Root! Orochimaru! They did this to Naruto." Jiraiya nodded, glad that Tsunade finally knew what was going on. Jiraiya was disgusted when he first found out what Orochimaru had done. He was unsure of how Orochimaru got away with it in the first place since he had been a part of the village when the kidnapping had happened, but it didn't matter. There were still questions that Jiraiya had. What was the point of Orochimaru doing this though? And what is with Root being involved? Jiraiya shrugged at this and said, he has always had the support of Root. Danzo may have been backing Orochimaru in his experiments, but no one could say. Tsunade nodded at this, but then Shizune jumped in and said, that still doesn't explain the scar on your neck now. Jiraiya chuckled at this and said, I was hoping you wouldn't say that. Let's just say I had a run-in with someone I didn't think I would ever meet. What are you talking about? Shizune asked. Ever heard of the Kagaya clan? Jiraiya asked with a little smirk. Tsunade gasped and Shizune shook her head, clearly clueless. Tsunade was clearly shocked. The Kagaya was wiped out when they attacked Kurigakure, so how did Jiraiya meet one of the members? Did he have it? The Kekai Genkai? Jiraiya nodded and said, it was one of the toughest battles I have fought in a long time. He was clearly high up there on a power scale, but no match for a ninja of my caliber. Jiraiya had clearly underestimated him though, and because of that, got the scar, leaving him injured. He had nicked his throat well and was bleeding profusely for a while, but recovered quickly. At least he had found out information about Naruto and what exactly happened to him. He knew that it was worth it for his godson. How has Naruto been? Jiraiya asked. He's been okay. He missed you last weekend. He can tell these sort of things, it's really uncanny, Tsunade said. Oh, Jiraiya said, clearly amused. He cried a good portion of the day Saturday, which is unusual. He's quiet. I think he just missed you, Tsunade said, with a small smile on her face. Nice to know that Gaki thinks of me. They all laughed at that. Everyone was pleasant with each other for the rest of the night, enjoying each other's company and carrying conversation, drinking well into the night. 4 months later. Today, Naruto was 6 months old and Jiraiya was in to visit. He walked in the house to Tsunade and Shizune sitting on the floor, Naruto sitting on his own in front of them. They were laughing at Naruto's antics. It was a nice sight to see, but he wanted to be a part of it. He walked in and announced himself saying, the super uncle has arrived. More like super pervert, Tsunade muttered. Jiraiya laughed in good nature and swooped up his godson, cradling him and tickling him, making him laugh hysterically. Shizune smiled at Jiraiya and his fatherly actions. Although he didn't seem like a father figure, he really had his moments. The scar still laid on his neck. Jiraiya had refused to remove it from medical ninjutsu, saying that he wanted to have it there in memory of Naruto and the time he found out he was a Senju. Tsunade admired that Jiraiya wanted to even have the scar, let alone kept it in memory of Naruto and even more likely herself. How's Sensei? Tsunade asked. He's okay. He wants to see Naruto. I was thinking we could meet him with Naruto sometime for his 1-year birthday. It would be nice for the both of them, Jiraiya said. And go to Konoha? Absolutely not, Tsunade said sternly. Of course not. He was planning on making a trip over to Suna anyways. He makes a small detour and we meet him midway. We need to move anyways. Move? What do you mean? I've caught wind of rumors going around about 2 healers in Cha no Kuni. That would be you too. People get suspicious. Better to say we move, disappear for a bit and show up somewhere else. I was thinking Kawa no Kuni, Land of Rivers, would be a good place to go anyways. It's quiet and secluded there. Where Takumi village is at? Are you kidding me? Ninja around the whole continent go there. Closer to Hai no Kuni obviously. I think it's a good location to practice medicine. A lot of missions go wrong there, and if you guys keep quiet enough, you can practice medicine without pushing it. Things could go very wrong, Jiraiya. I'm concerned for Naruto. And I'm concerned that if you stay here, things could go downhill very fast. At least there it's a more centralized, but still secluded location. It's near the mountainous regions anyways. You will be okay. Tsunade thought over it for a few moments, then said, I'll think about it. I'm not convinced, but if something goes down here, we will move as soon as possible. Jiraiya nodded, satisfied with the answer for now. He returned to playing with his godson and they continued their day, celebrating Naruto and how big he was getting and how fast he was growing. 4 months later, Tsunade was in the village today shopping after working diligently on a fisherman who had cut his leg and had lost quite a bit of blood. He was going to be okay, but would have to rest for a few days more than likely. She was grabbing some fresh herbs and meats for the next few days. She had finished paying for everything when something in the corner of her vision caught her attention. Standing across the street from the stall she was at was a person in a cloak, obviously observing her from the way said person was standing. Tsunade grabbed everything and left quickly, moving through the village. The person followed her subtly, but not subtly enough for her eye. Tsunade walked through the forest. Then, she suddenly dashed off and hid her chakra signature, making sure the person wouldn't be able to find her. The person made it inside the forest and was obviously looking for her after losing her so fast. Tsunade was hiding behind a tree. She saw him jump through the branches, looking around. She jumped up and yelled, "Who the hell do you think you are?" and slammed his fist into the person, when said person suddenly disappeared in a poof of smoke. Senju Tsunade, still legendary as always, the person said chuckling, voice echoing around her in the trees. "Who are you?" Tsunade asked. A person interested in some rumors is all, the person said, now identifiably a man from the voice. "Show yourself." The man stepped out behind a tree and Tsunade jumped down to meet him. The breeze blew around them, catching the leaves making them float on the wind. Tsunade stared him down when the man drew a sword from his cloak. It was a short tanto, but had chakra running through it. She knew it was a simple, but deadly trick if he was experienced with it. "Is it true you have a son, Tsunade? I always was intrigued if you would carry on your clan. Why are you so interested in the Senju?" "Just an instinct." Then, the man sprung into action, disappearing in a Shunshin body flicker technique, and reappearing in front of her, already sword above his head in preparation for a strike. Tsunade sidestepped and threw a punch directly into the man's stomach, making him fly back. He gave a oof, signifying he had lost his breath from the punch she packed. He crashed into a tree, breaking through it and landed into another, denting it. He gave a groan but got up quickly and assumed a stance, but Tsunade was already in action. She sprung immediately on him and charged chakra into her fist, ready to make for a deadly punch. She got there and swung, but he shunshined away and instead the punch went through the tree, breaking it on impact, and then making a small crater in the ground. "Impressive. I will need more people to take you on, it seems. I will retreat for now, but be warned, Tsunade, I will be back," the man said from the tree branches above her. She looked up but he was already gone. He was fast. Really fast. Tsunade sprinted home after that, groceries in hand. She arrived and saw the house undisturbed and gave a small sigh of relief, worried before that the man might have been targeting the house originally. She walked inside and saw Tsunade playing with Naruto, who was walking along the sofa, holding on to it. He was smiling brightly, his green eyes shimmering with the achievement he had just made. He had grown significantly and is very healthy. Tsunade had gotten him weaned off of feeding now and he was eating food regularly now. Shizune thought it was early, but Tsunade thought she had been right doing it. He wanted him eating regularly and knew he would develop well for a child like him. "Tsunade, you're back," Shizune said. "Shizune, we're locking down. We're leaving together now." "Understood," Tsunade said sternly. Shizune looked up at her master and saw the look she wore. It was one that wasn't to be discussed at the moment. She nodded and picked up Naruto saying, "Sorry Ototo, we have to get things done." Naruto looked up at Shizune and only looked at her. He still had a small smile that said, "I understand." Tsunade went into the back of the house and started packing necessities. She grabbed some things for Naruto and the rest was clothes and travel supplies. She left the back rooms and made her way to the kitchen to pack some food that was worth bringing while traveling. By the time she was done with the tedious task, Shizune and Naruto were ready to go themselves, fully dressed and travel ready. Tsunade nodded and they walked out of the house, ready to move quickly. Tsunade picked up her son and strapped him onto her back. Where are we going to go, Tsunade? We will go to a fishing town Jiraiya planned to send us to as a contingency plan. It will take about a day of traveling with Naruto, so let's go full speed ahead. Hi. They took off into the trees, and while traveling, if you listened close enough you could hear the giggling of a small child in the tree canopies. Tsunade and Shizune made it to the border of Hai no Kuni. They were traveling swiftly when Tsunade didn't like the feeling of the forest around her. Shizune, take Naruto. I need a break, she said. Shizune knew Tsunade didn't need a break though, as this was their signal in case something was going to happen. She stopped and took the straps Naruto was sitting in and strapped him to her back. She stood up when suddenly kunai flew in all directions towards them. Shizune gasped, but Tsunade simply gave a HMPH, before grabbing Shizune and dropping to the ground, the kunai all missing. When they made it down, there was a fireball flying towards them from the distance, so they jumped to the side, the fireball flying past them. Extraordinary. You are something not to meddle with, Senju Tsunade, said a man who then jumped down from the trees in front of them. Then, 11 more ninja all jumped down and surrounded the three of them. Tsunade looked around and noticed all of them wearing plain white Anbu masks, decorated in Anbu armor and all wearing tantos. So this is Danzo's failsafe, huh? Take us out and grab Naruto. Tsunade asked with a deep growl. Danzo-sama has ordered the capture of Naruto. We are sorry, Tsunade-sama, but orders are orders. This is for the greater good of Konoha. Greater good. Rasengan. Spiraling sphere. Suddenly out of the trees came Jiraiya, slamming a blue chakra sphere into the man who was speaking. He flew a distance into the trees, breaking a few before finally rolling to a stop. He groaned, but could not get up again. Jiraiya stood next to Tsunade and Shizune and said, "Sorry I'm late. I heard from a contact about route discovering you too. I came as fast as I could." How far behind were you? Tsunade asked. About a few hours. Only took me a bit to catch up, I suppose, Jiraiya said. Tsunade nodded and cracked her knuckles, getting ready for a brawl. The root ninja all tensed, but then dashed, all intent at striking as a team. Jiraiya flew through hand seals and shouted, "Doden, Doryuheki. Earth release. Mud wall." He slammed his palm into the ground and the earth rose up underneath the party, shooting them up into the air. Jiraiya jumped away from the pillar into the open air and flew through more seals, before shouting, "Kaden, Enden. Fire release. Flame bullet." Jiraiya put his hand to hit mouth and made a tunnel for him to breathe through. He breathed out however fire and it came roaring down on two root ninja. They screamed and died a fiery death. He turned just in time to see Tsunade slam her fist into one of the root ninja, who had cracked his ribs from the impact. He flew into another ninja and they went flying through a couple trees. Shizune had spat out a couple of Senbon, skillfully taking out a single root ninja, bringing their numbers down to 7. You made a grave mistake taking on the gallant Jiraiya, the toad sage of Mount Myoboku. Jiraiya shouted, taking on a ridiculous pose. The root ninja all looked at Jiraiya expressionless, but Tsunade and Shizune had managed to sweat drop at Jiraiya's antics. Naruto only looked at the battle going on with shining eyes, intrigued by what was going on, clapping his hands here and there. Jiraiya shrugged, then swiftly went through multiple hand signs before shouting, "Doden, Dosekiryu. Earth release. Earth dragon." From the earth then shot up a dragon made of the rock and earth itself, turning into a longer serpentine dragon. It flew towards the enemies around him and most were instantly crushed. 3 regrouped, obviously the only survivors. Jiraiya leapt towards Tsunade and Shizune, who were standing off to the side now, guarding Naruto. The root ninja there stood huddled, then they all consecutively nodded and dashed off, away from the small party huddled. Jiraiya sighed and turned back to the other two. "I'm glad I got here in time," Jiraiya said. Thanks you old pervert, Tsunade said. Jiraiya shrugged it off and looked at his godson, who was smiling happily and clapping his hands still. He gave him a small smile and a wave, then turned his attention back to the scene in front of him. It looks like Danzo wanted Naruto in his hands. He might have had him too if I had not arrived. These men had relatively high chakra signatures, and had I not surprised the leader like I did, they would have been more coordinated, Jiraiya said in relief. Why did they retreat though? Isn't Root known for no retreat? Tsunade asked. Danzo may have ordered it, Shizune said. Most likely, Jiraiya said with a nod. They shook off the adrenaline and the dust that had gathered on them. Jiraiya looked at the party and said, we need to move quickly. We will travel in Hai no Kuni for a few days, losing any tracks. We will get to Kawa no Kuni and the place I told you about. It's a lot safer there. Tsunade and Shizune nodded. They gathered themselves and then they all dashed off into the distance. 1 week later, after many days of laying false trails and investigating rumors, Tsunade and Shizune had completely buried their tracks and were now in Kawa no Kuni with Jiraiya. They were walking on the road, Naruto being held by Tsunade currently. He was giggling, his green eyes shimmering as he was being tickled by Tsunade. We're almost there, Haim, and I know you're going to love the place, Jiraiya said. Oh, so positive here, huh? Tsunade asked with a slight smirk. Jiraiya only gave a cheeky grin and continued walking. Tsunade and Shizune followed behind. Soon enough, they had reached a mountain town in the northern regions of the country. They made it to the outskirts on the other side of the town, and off in the distance there was a house, surrounded by a few trees here and there. Shizune and Tsunade saw it was a clear space and had suitable living conditions. Inside the house, it was almost an exact replica of the last house's layout, except it had another bedroom. Jiraiya stretched out and then walked towards the back of the house towards the spare bedroom and said, I call the spare. I need a nap. And before the two ladies could say something, they heard a door open and close behind the old pervert. They looked at each other and shrugged. They took off the packs they had and put Naruto down, who was excited to finally be down again. He went crawling over towards the table in the sitting room and started to stand up. Shizune went to observe him and put things away and tidy up in the room, while Tsunade worked on the rest of the house, moving with quick precision and necessity. Tsunade-sama, how long do you think we will be here this time? Shizune asked suddenly. I don't know. We're in a nice location since it's farther away from larger towns and villages. I don't predict us having any problems for a while, to be honest, Tsunade said offhandedly. Shizune nodded and sat down with Naruto and started to reflect on the last week of traveling. She knew they were lucky to get away from the root Anbu without a scratch out them. After they had gotten away, they laid low in a small tavern town. They made some spare cash from small healing jobs they could do. They traveled over that week and even made it over by the daimyo's place, but made it through without being detected. They were off the radar again thanks to Jiraiya. Jiraiya really was a genius at infiltration and spy networking. He knew how to disappear when he wanted to. Tsunade wasn't thinking about that, however. She was working on getting the place locked down into a capable place worth defending if the worst came to be. She knew one thing: if anyone ever came after her baby again, she would destroy them. Everyone says never to piss off a mother bear. She had definitely become one now. 2 months later, Naruto was walking hand in hand with Shizune outside the house. Tsunade was sitting on the porch observing the two while drinking sake from a cup in her hand. She smiled at the sight of the two hand in hand taking small steps. Naruto was progressing relatively normally, and maybe even a bit faster than normal children would. She then thought about the next few days. Today, Jiraiya would show up with Hiruzen, her old sensei, for tomorrow. Tomorrow they were celebrating Naruto's birthday because in 3 days' time it would actually be his birthday. Hiruzen was returning from a diplomatic mission in Tsunagaku, which had surprised Tsunade when she even heard about it in the first place. She supposed Hiruzen may have just made it up, but she didn't think so in this case. She knew he was usually honest, and wanted the best for everyone. He was known not only as the Kami no Shinbi but also, the professor, for a reason. She smiled at the thought of the small family being together for Naruto's first birthday. Her little boy was growing up so fast as it was already. She got up and picked up Naruto and said, "Time for your nappy, Naruto-kun." He gave her this look that said he understood and he definitely didn't want a nap. He never cried about it though because he usually enjoyed his sleep once she got him to stay still in the bed. He turned and saw Shizune giving him the hand squeeze wave and he gave one back. She giggled at him and saw him taken inside. She went and started working on the garden while Tsunade walked him back to his room and laid him down in his crib. He started to crawl around, but she tucked him up and he started to calm down. She had figured out this trick before that if she stroked the whisker marks on his cheeks, he would fall asleep quicker and before you knew it, started purring. It would make any girl squeal in delight, but she was his mother so she only smiled at the motion. It didn't take long for him to fall asleep. She left him in his room and walked outside in the back again where Shizune was working in the garden. She stepped out and saw Hiruzen and Jiraiya standing around talking with Shizune. In the background she also saw a young Anbu to her surprise. She stepped out and smiled at the group. "So it seems that the three of you finally got here. Took you long enough," Tsunade said. "Could have kept you waiting longer, Haim. Sorry we were running late," Jiraiya said. She shrugged it off and walked up to her old sensei. She gave him a hug and he smiled at her, returning the favor. He looked at her and said, "How is my old student doing?" "Just fine, sensei. We had an incident a while ago I'm sure Jiraiya informed you of however," Tsunade said. Hiruzen frowned and nodded. He knew about everything that happened with the regular check-ins that Jiraiya gave Hiruzen. He knew about Danzo and the mysterious man that had shown up. He was getting nervous at the plays that were being made by the players around the continent. He really was getting too old to be Hokage, but he always knew he was one of the best cut out for the job. "And how is my grandson?" Hiruzen asked. Tsunade smiled and waved him to come inside. He followed her immediately, eager to see the young boy he had left in Tsunade's care and love. He went to the back with her and they stepped inside Naruto's room where he was sleeping inside the crib. They stepped just next to it so Hiruzen could look closely at Naruto. He smiled at how much Naruto had grown over the past year. He could tell Tsunade was already proud to be his mother and had really grown. He looked over her in her new attire. She was wearing a green kimono with the Senju symbol on the back of the top. She was also wearing flat shoes. She of course kept her old battle armor on underneath her kimono and her gambling jacket on, but she still had somewhat of a more relaxed and motherly, yet shinobi-like look about her. She also had her hair down now, a little longer than what she used to keep it at. He looked at Naruto and how he looked now. He was starting to grow out his hair now, getting more hairs than he had. He also had a slender look but looked healthy all the same. "You've taken really good care of him," he said, then reached down and started stroking his cheek. Tsunade chuckled and said, "Stroke his whisker marks. He loves that." He moved his fingers down and to his surprise he started to purr deeply and he had to chuckle himself. He knew this would be a good first birthday for Naruto. Over the day, Tsunade got to hang out a lot with her old sensei and Jiraiya and got introduced to Kakashi, the young Anbu who had come with the two. He was Minato's old student and Hiruzen trusted him enough to bring him along to meet Naruto. He was excited to meet his sensei's kid. When Naruto had finally woken up, it had been fun watching him walk around slowly to meet the people all here now. He had giggled a lot and smiled all the same, making him the lovable child that Tsunade and Shizune knew him to be all the time. Jiraiya had to admit the kid had grown on him over the last year and was excited to have him as an apprentice when he became older. Kakashi had taken to calling Naruto his nephew, which Hiruzen was happy that Kakashi was excited about Naruto and being his uncle. Hiruzen knew that when Naruto returned to Konoha, he would have a large family there and be happy. The next 2 days flew by with Naruto's birthday. Kakashi had actually made Naruto some big wooden blocks for Naruto to play with and stack around. Naruto of course was overjoyed at seeing the blocks that were a decent size. Hiruzen had given Naruto a stuffed animal which was a fox. Jiraiya had the same idea but instead it was a large toad. He had also given him a toad wallet for him to start saving money whenever he would get some. Shizune had gotten Naruto some nice clothes and Tsunade had done the same. Overall, Naruto had enjoyed his first birthday and the family was happy that Naruto was having a good time. They knew one thing. Naruto was an extraordinary child. He was always happy and he had a bright personality. So bright in fact, the forest around them